today we are about moving this conversation to action. But I just wanted to begin quickly to say, well, what is this conversation, right? I've been in the midst of this conversation my entire life. And this conversation is about women becoming and being equal partners, not only in the business world, but in our home life, and socially, that women have the same opportunities as men. So I started off having this conversation with my mother when I was a little girl, because my mother was one of the examples of women who grew up in the 50s and was a straight A student in college, but met my father at the end of her freshman year. He was a fifth-year senior, and she'd skipped a grade. She was a 17-year-old freshman, #1 Latin student in Illinois, and a star. She met my father and fell in love and dropped out of college to marry him. He was in the Navy, so off she went, and found herself at 23 years old with 3 little baby girls. And in the mid-'70s, in the middle of the Gloria Steinem time, my mother went back to school, finished her degree, got her master's in psychology, and taught women's reentry programs. And she would come home and share. I was the oldest girl, would sit with me and tell me the stories. And we'd have this conversation about the struggles that women were having then in the 70s. And I remember thinking, why? And then flash forward 20 years later, when I was President Clinton's advisor on women, my mother came to visit me at a conference I was speaking at. And it was a day full of conversations about women and where we were. And at the end of that day, when she left me, she gave me a big hug and she said, "You know what's interesting today, Betsy?" She said, "These are the same conversations we were having in the mid-'70s, we're now having in the mid-'90s. And I said to my mom, "But no, it's different. We're making progress." And we were. And I was so proud to be working for President Clinton, who was such a champion on these issues. And one of the things that President Clinton did was he said, "I want 40% of all the top positions in my administration to be women." And he put people in HR that were held accountable to make it happen. But there were other things going on. I want to share 2 things that I remember from my days then. I remember we did a Women's History Month celebration at the White House, and I remember Donna Shalala, who was then our head of Health and Human Services, was teasing President Clinton, and she said, "You know, President Clinton," she said, "the difference between today in your administration and the progress of where we've come since she had worked in Carter's administration." She said the difference is that today you can actually have an idea or an initiative that goes all the way from the inception of the idea to implementation without ever touching a man's hands. And there's so many women now that are part of the Health and Human Services, and the president got a great kick out of that. So I remember thinking, well, the conversation is changing. And then my most special day I think I ever had in the Clinton White House was the day that President Clinton nominated Madeleine Albright to be our first woman Secretary of State, against a lot of people saying to him, a lot of advisors, "If you put a woman in that job, Mr. President, you can forget about foreign policy." And the president said, "I don't think so." And when he appointed Madeleine Albright, you cannot believe the joy in that White House, and the calls and the letters and the telegrams that were pouring into the White House that day. And I said to him, I happened to be with him that day, and I said, "Mr. President, are you surprised at the incredible outpouring?" And he stepped back and he said, "You know what? I am. Because, Betsy, I didn't choose Madeleine because she's a woman. I chose her because she's most qualified for the job," which is what we want. So flash forward 15 years, and we've had Colin Powell, a black man, Condi Rice, a woman, and now Hillary Clinton. And my little 9-year-old daughter said to me recently, they were studying history in her 4th grade and talking about Secretary of State. And she was telling me, she said, Hillary Clinton's so amazing. She said, "Mommy, can a man be Secretary of State?" So flash forward 15 years later, and I'm sitting on the couch with Gloria in her office, and we're having the same damn conversation. Why are we having this conversation, Gloria? And that's when Gloria said, we need to do something about this. And I'll tell you, in the last 4 years, as I've traveled around speaking with corporate America, around my book and on leadership, the thing that kept sticking out for me was the conversation I was having with CEOs and senior leaders in corporate America, which is, why are we still having this conversation? Why have we not made more progress? And the why, when you really step back and go, well, where are we? Gloria mentioned a lot of these numbers, already, but women as the workforce. The world has changed. 70% of the new entrants into the workplace are women and people of color. 58% of all the graduates of college and masters are women. But here's a fact I think is fascinating. Only 17% of college graduates worldwide are white men. Yet, with all this progress and all this change, women are only 12 to 15% of the top jobs and boards. The numbers I find fascinating for corporate America is women as customer. Women as customer. Do you know women account for 85% of consumer spending? Women. Women buy 91% of new homes, 92% of vacations, 66% of new cars, 89% of bank accounts, 60% of men's clothing. And yet, 91% of women in a recent survey said they felt misunderstood by advertisers. And that, I find this interesting, only 3% of creative directors at ad agencies are women. If I was starting a corporation, I think I'd be marketing to women. And then lastly, from my background, I just have to say, women as voters. We're 52% of the population. Yet we only hold 17% of the seats in Congress, and we're only 6 of women are governors. There has been a gender gap since 1980. Women have elected every president. Bill Clinton won re-election in 1996 by 17 points. George Bush made huge gains with women. It's how he beat John Kerry. And President Obama won by 13 points by women. So I stand here before you and I say, women are no longer an interest group. Why is every political candidate, you go on their website and women are part of the interest groups? We are half the population. So why now? What's different? The conversation has changed, and that's what's exciting, is that there has been a huge shift in the conversation, and that CEOs like Bob Moritz are willing to admit that they're challenged by this because there's now a widespread belief that it's no longer just a nice thing to do to put women in top jobs. We've moved, as my friend Tom Peters says, we've moved from social good to business case. And companies that are looking at 2020 goals know they cannot show up in 2020 with a mostly white male workforce and be competitive and be profitable. That's the future. And the book by Marshall Goldsmith, which I love the title, which is so relevant for this, What Got Us Here Won't Get Us There.